modify the common LTR file, but actually a more elegant thing is to modify your own create your own CSS files, and then anything you do in these files will override what's in the common LTR file. So if you want to create your own CSS file, there are 3 properties that you want to add to your Ant project file. And the first is args.css. When you find this property, you define this property and you specify which is the new CSS file that you want to use. The args CSS property defines the path to, when you generate your output HTML, it will define the path to where that CSS file is stored. And the third one simply is a switch. This allows you to turn it on or turn it off. And so what you want to do here is say, just set it to yes, and this just ensures that this copy operation occurs. So let's take a look in our project file. And I'm going to cheat and copy on something rather than you see me type and make typos. So here we have our 3 properties. And so we have args.css, and what this says is within our DITA directory, we want to have a, we need to make sure this actually comes after we define DITA-dir. My mistake. So we have our DITA directory, CSS, and a file called garage.css. And I've created something off to the side here. I've got a CSS file called garage.css, and it simply defines a much nicer body. Default, it assigns a font for that body, it assigns a nice background gray color, and also defines a copyright footer. So we need to do 2 things. First off, we need to make sure we save this file. So now we're saying, here's our CSS file, we've got to bring this on. Then we're going to say, in the output, put this into a folder called CSS, and make all references to that, and then here's our switch that just says, yes, this is what we want to do. So the one other thing I need to do now is bring in my garage file. So I said the garage.css was going to appear in our CSS folder, and so I'm just going to drag this on and copy it into our CSS folder. So now we have this. So now we can come here and we can run our transform. And so we're done. So now we can bring our Firefox window on screen, and we can refresh. And so you see now our new font takes place of the old times, and we're using a nice gray background. So now you actually have something that's much more elegant than a hack. You actually are specifying this is the CSS file that I want to use. And there's one other thing to know about using CSS files, and that is, if you notice through this approach, this only allows you to specify one CSS file. What happens if you've got multiple CSS files you need to bring in? Well, CSS has a nice little directive called @import, and @import allows you to specify another CSS file to import into your CSS. So what you do is you create a base or master CSS file, and within that CSS file, then you use @import to specify the CSS files you want to bring in. So in this case, in this example, we're pulling in a CSS file both for our group as well as for our company. Now there's another hack that's associated with CSS. And this really is a hack. There's nothing else to be said about it other than it's really it only works for XHTML. And DITA specifies an output class attribute, and this is defined for all elements in DITA. When DITA is processed through the Open Toolkit, anything that's in output class, so here we have a UL in DITA that uses the output class attribute. When this is processed into HTML, what happens is in HTML we have a class attribute, and it contains the same value as we specified in output class. So your writers, your class, the people who contribute to your content, can actually include these attributes in their content and know that in output the class will also be referenced. So then you can modify your CSS to support what you're doing in this. Now, one thing to be careful of in using the output class is that there is no value checking. So if somebody should use the output class attribute and they misspell or make a typo in this attribute name, there's nothing along the line that's going to say, oh wait, this is not correct. If you want to check that kind of thing, you at a bare minimum you need to go in and modify your XSL, and actually for doing this kind of thing, the more elegant way is to actually use specialization. So another way we can modify our output is HTML headers and footers. Within the DITA Open Toolkit, you can have some boilerplate headers, footers, or HTML head information. And by head information, this is within the HTML file, there's the head tag, and within the head, you can have directives that include JavaScript, that include CSS files to set metadata, and so you can use this head to the head information to actually set those attributes. Again, well, there are three ANT properties that we use for doing this. There's header, args.header, args.footer, and args.hdf. So this is where we specify the head data. Now, what you specify, the value for these properties, is an actual HTML file. So this HTML file has to be well-formed. It has to be true XHTML. It has to be valid. So attributes have to be quoted. Any open tag, you have to have a balanced close tag, and so on. Let's just take a quick look at using that in our file. Whoops, grabbed the wrong file. So here we are back in our ANT project, and we want to add a new property here. And this property says we want to define the footer, and for the footer we want to use a file in resource that is called myfooter.html. And let's just take a look quickly at myfooter.html. And so myfooter.html, all it does is it has a P and says it has a class, it's a copyright footer, and we have a copyright date, and we say 2009 Scriptorium Publishing Services, all rights reserved. So if we make sure we save our change here and then modify our resource folder by bringing in myfooter, we're all good to go. So we can run the Open Toolkit again. And we're done. So let's take a look again at our output file. So now we're going to refresh this display. And as you notice, down at the bottom we have, in very small type, we have copyright 2009 Scriptorium Publishing Services. Just as a bit of a disclaimer, I need to say this is just for example, and we're certainly not putting our copyright on information that comes from SourceForge, because this is the sample file. This is just for demo. All right. So here's the slide on creating the footer.